All right, so you're gearing up for the UPSC and international relations is like your main focus.
Yeah.
Well, today's deep dive,
Yeah.
it's practically required reading. We're tackling Thomas Hobbes,
Okay.
a giant of political philosophy. But his ideas are shockingly relevant to understanding.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's true. He might seem like this figure, from way back when, but his work is like a masterclass in power dynamics.
Yeah.
And, we'll be looking at selections from his writings, especially Leviathan,
Sure.
focusing on how his understanding of human nature shapes his ideas about conflict,
Right.
cooperation, and the need for order on the international stage.
And let's be honest, he's not exactly known for being a cheery optimist.
No, not really.
Hobbes had some pretty intense things to say about human nature, driven by self-interest,
Right.
consumed by fear and constantly seeking power. Kind of makes you wonder if world peace is even possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's a stark contrast to earlier thinkers who saw humans as naturally social and cooperative.
Right.
Hobbes flips the script, arguing that our primary motivation is self-preservation.
Okay.
And this is the foundation of his whole political theory.
Wow.
He's not just describing human nature, he's building an argument for a very specific kind of political order.
Okay, so how does this rather bleak view of human nature translate to the world of nations and international relations?
Yeah.
Is it really all just a power grab on a global scale?
Well, think about it. If individuals are primarily self-interested, wouldn't that translate to nations acting in their own best interest?
Yeah.
Even if it means like stepping on others to get there.
Right.
Hobbes argues that without some kind of controlling force, some form of like overarching authority, the world would just descend into what he calls the state of nature.
And that's where things get really interesting and a bit terrifying.
Yes.
He paints this vivid picture of life in the state of nature as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah. And it's
an image that seems to resonate even today.
Absolutely.
Right.
Think about the conflicts we see erupting around the world. The scramble for resources, the breakdown of trust, the pursuit of power and dominance.
Yeah.
Hobbes argues that this is the inevitable outcome when there's no structure to regulate our behavior, no system to enforce rules and keep those baser instincts in check.
It's like a worst-case scenario playing out on the global stage.
It is.
But for our listeners prepping for the UPSC, how should they be applying this concept of the state of nature to their understanding of international relations?
Yeah, it's not about taking Hobbes literally or saying that the world is constantly on the brink of total anarchy.
Okay.
But it's a powerful analytical tool that allows us to see how quickly things can unravel.
Okay.
When those core elements of order, trust, cooperation, a shared sense of rules start to disintegrate.
Right.
Think of it as a lens for understanding why international institutions,
Okay.
treaties and alliances are so important.
Yeah.
They are, in a way, attempts to avoid that Hobbesian nightmare.
It's a reminder that those periods of peace and stability are often fragile, something we have to actively work towards.
Not something that just happens naturally, but if human nature is as self-serving as Hobbes claims, is true international cooperation even possible?
That's where things get even more nuanced, because Hobbes also introduces this concept of natural laws. Now, these aren't laws in the traditional sense, but rather dictates of reason, the things that logically lead us toward peace, even if our instincts might pull us in another direction.
Okay.
This is where your UPSC prep gets a real boost,
Yeah.
understanding how these seemingly contradictory ideas play out.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are these natural laws and how do they factor into the messy world of international relations?
All right, well, the first and most fundamental law is to seek peace.
Okay.
This isn't just about avoiding war. It's about actively pursuing cooperation,
Right.
finding ways to resolve disputes peacefully.
Yeah.
Building trust between nations sound familiar.
Yeah.
This is the bedrock of diplomacy, international organizations, and all those efforts to create a more stable world order.
For you, this means recognizing the ongoing struggle between our self-serving nature and the need for order and cooperation.
That's starting to make sense.
Mm.
But if we're all driven by self-interest, as Hobbes suggests,
Yeah.
why would any nation willingly give up anything for the sake of peace?
Right.
It seems a bit idealistic, don't you think?
And that leads us to the second natural law, the willingness to give up some of our natural rights for the sake of security.
Okay.
In other words, you can't have it all.
Right.
You have to be willing to compromise, to accept some limitations to achieve something greater than yourself.
Okay.
This is directly applicable to how nations behave.
Right.
They often have to cede some degree of autonomy to agree to international laws and treaties,
Right.
even if it means giving up some freedom of action.
Okay.
And why? Because they recognize the benefits of collective security.
Oh, okay.
The idea that we're all safer when we work together.
That's fascinating. It's like the logic of a trade agreement,
It is.
but applied to the entire international system. But who gets to decide what we give up?
Yeah.
And how do we ensure it's a fair deal?
This is where that third natural law comes into play, honoring contracts.
Okay.
For Hobbes, the only way out of that chaotic state of nature is through a social contract.
Right.
It's an agreement where individuals willingly surrender some of their rights to a higher authority, a sovereign, in exchange for protection and the enforcement of rules.
Yeah.
Think about how this mirrors the way nations form alliances or join international organizations.
Right.
They agree to certain obligations, even if it means limiting their own power, because they see the long-term benefits of a more stable and predictable world.
This is all connecting back to those international relations theories you'll be wrestling with for the UPSC.
Right.
But I have to ask, who is this sovereign in the international system? Is it the UN, the Security Council, or is something even more powerful needed to truly keep things in check?
That's a great question, and one that leads us directly to the heart of Hobbes's most controversial and enduring idea, the Leviathan. But before we unpack that, let's take a moment to appreciate just how radical Hobbes's thinking was.
All right.
He's arguing that peace and order don't just happen naturally. They require a conscious choice, a willingness to compromise,
Okay.
and a recognition that our own self-interest is often best served by working within a system of rules, even if those rules sometimes feel restrictive.
Okay.
All right, let's talk about the Leviathan, the linchpin of Hobbes' philosophy.
Okay.
He uses this image of a giant, awe-inspiring figure
Right.
to represent the ultimate sovereign,
Okay.
the entity that emerges from the social contract to enforce the rules and maintain order. It's a powerful symbol and one that has sparked debate for centuries.
I can see why the idea of absolute power, even in the name of peace and security, is bound to raise some eyebrows. But how does this Leviathan actually function?
Right.
What are its powers, and why does Hobbes believe it's the only way to prevent society from descending into chaos?
For Hobbes, it all comes back to fear. He argues that the only way to truly guarantee peace is to have a power so overwhelming, so unchallengeable, that it eliminates the possibility of rebellion or a return to that brutal state of nature.
So it's about deterrence.
Yes.
The idea that if the consequences of breaking the rules are severe enough, no one will dare to challenge the system.
Exactly. The Leviathan is the ultimate source of law. Judge, jury, and executioner all rolled into one.
Why?
It's not bound by any external authority, no higher court of appeal.
Right.
What the Leviathan decrees is law, and that law is backed by the full force of its power.
But that sounds a bit terrifying, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What's to stop this Leviathan from becoming a tyrant, from abusing its power and oppressing the very people it's supposed to protect?
Right.
It seems like a risky gamble to place so much power in the hands of one entity.
It's a question that has haunted political philosophers for centuries.
Yeah.
And Hobbes, to his credit, does acknowledge the potential for abuse.
Okay.
But he argues that the alternative, the anarchy and violence of the state of nature, is far worse. It's a trade-off, a choice between two imperfect options.
Right.
For Hobbes, the risk of tyranny is a price worth paying for the security and stability that the Leviathan provides.
It's a sobering thought, and one that has implications for how we think about power on the international stage as well. But if we apply this to international relations, who or what would be the Leviathan in that context?
That's where things get really interesting for you as a UPSC aspirant.
Okay.
Clearly, there's no single global Leviathan in the way Hobbes envisioned.
Right.
Power is far more diffuse and contested in the international system.
Right.
But think about the institutions and mechanisms that have emerged to regulate relations between states.
Okay.
The UN International Law Treaties Alliances.
Right.
They're all, in a way, attempts to create a more stable and predictable world order to establish rules of the game and consequences for breaking them.
It's like trying to create a system of global governance that reflects those core Hobbesian principles.
Yeah.
Even if it's never quite as neat and absolute as the Leviathan he describes. But does Hobbes offer any guidance on how to actually achieve this kind of international order?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of clear laws consistently enforced.
Okay.
That's the foundation of the Leviathan's power, the certainty that actions have consequences. In the international system, this translates to a strong emphasis on international law.
Okay.
Treaties and mechanisms for resolving disputes peacefully. Think about the International Court of Justice or the World Trade Organization. They're all designed to create a framework of rules and consequences to govern relations between states.
But we've seen time and time again how easily those rules can be broken.
Yeah.
How international law can be flouted, especially by powerful states.
Right.
Does Hobbes have an answer for that? How do you enforce rules on actors who believe they're above the law?
That's the perennial challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this is where Hobbes's focus on power comes back into play. He argues that the Leviathan must have the capacity to enforce its will, to compel obedience, even from those who might be tempted to challenge its authority.
Right.
In the international system, this translates to the need for mechanisms to ensure collective security, to deter aggression and punish those who violate the rules. Think about the role of alliances like NATO or the concept of collective defense enshrined in the UN Charter.
Okay.
They're all attempts to create a balance of power that discourages reckless behavior.
So it's a delicate balance then.
Yeah.
Creating a system of rules and consequences, but also ensuring that there's enough power behind those rules to make them meaningful.
Precisely. And for you, as you dive into the complexities of international relations, understanding that tension between law and power,
Right.
between the desire for order and the realities of a world where power is constantly shifting is essential.
Right.
It's one of the key insights Hobbes offers, a way of seeing beyond the surface and understanding the deeper forces at play in global politics.
It's fascinating how Hobbes's ideas written centuries ago can still feel so relevant to the challenges we face in international relations today.
Yeah.
He gives us this framework for understanding those fundamental drivers of state behavior, the pursuit of power, the fear of anarchy, the constant struggle to balance self-interest with the need for cooperation.
It's like he provides a set of lenses for viewing the world, helping us see those underlying power dynamics that shape everything, from trade disputes to military alliances to the very structure of the international system itself.
But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't explored yet.
Okay.
Hobbes's idea of felicity. It sounds like a feel-good concept.
Right.
But knowing Hobbes, there's probably a darker side to it.
Probably.
What does felicity actually mean in his philosophy? And why is it important for our UPSC audience to grasp?
You're right. It's not about happiness in the traditional sense.
Okay.
For Hobbes, felicity is about the continual satisfaction of desires. This restless striving for what we want, what we need, what we believe will make us secure.
Right.
And remember, there's no summum bonum in Hobbes's world.
You're right.
No ultimate good or highest moral ideal.
Okay.
It's all about this endless pursuit of power and advantage, this constant motion towards securing what we perceive as better.
So if we apply this to international relations,
Yeah.
are you saying that nations are essentially caught in this perpetual cycle of wanting more territory, more resources, more influence?
Yeah.
Always striving for that next level of power, never truly satisfied.
That's a key insight Hobbes offers.
Wow.
And it helps explain why conflict seems to be such a recurring theme in human history.
Okay.
Nations, just like individuals, are driven by this inherent desire for more, for what they perceive as their best interest, even if it comes at the expense of others.
But where does morality fit into all of this? If it's all about power and self-interest, doesn't that lead to a pretty ruthless dog-eat-dog world? How can we even talk about things like international law or human rights if everyone is just acting out of pure self-interest?
That's where Hobbes's concept of natural law comes back into play.
Okay.
Remember, those laws are dictates of reason,
Right.
guiding us toward peace and cooperation.
Yeah.
Even if our instincts might pull us in a different direction.
Right.
And even with his rather pessimistic view of human nature,
Okay.
Hobbes argues that following those natural laws is ultimately in our best interest,
Okay.
both individually and collectively.
Right.
It's the most rational path to achieving that felicity we were just talking about.
So it's like recognizing that even in a world of self-serving actors, there's a logic, a strategic advantage to behaving in ways that promote cooperation stability.
Right.
Because if everyone is constantly trying to cheat or exploit the system, it ultimately collapses and no one wins.
Precisely. It's a delicate balancing act. Finding that sweet spot between pursuing your own interests and recognizing that sometimes cooperation is the key to achieving those very interests.
Right.
This is a crucial insight for anyone studying international relations, especially for the UPSC exam.
Okay.
Think about all those treaties and agreements, all those international organizations working to regulate everything from trade and finance to environmental protection and arms control.
Right.
They're all, in a way, attempts to create a more stable and predictable world to channel those Hobbesian drives into something more constructive, something that benefits everyone in the long run.
Okay, so let's bring this all home for our listeners who are gearing up for the UPSC.
Okay.
We've unpacked Hobbes' ideas about human nature, the state of nature, the social contract, the Leviathan, and even this concept of felicity.
Right.
What's the big takeaway here?
Right.
Why does any of this matter for someone who wants to understand international relations and maybe even shape global policy someday?
Because understanding Hobbes is like having a cheat sheet. For deciphering the motivations and behaviors of states, it helps you grasp those enduring tensions between power and cooperation. Right. Between national interests and global order.
Okay.
And these are the very tensions that drive international relations that make it such a fascinating and challenging field.
It's like having that X-ray vision, being able to see beneath the surface of events and understand those underlying forces that shape global politics.
Yes.
And that, my friends, is a superpower worth having, not just for an exam, but for navigating the complexities of the world we live in.
Couldn't have said it better myself, so. To all our aspiring diplomats and policymakers out there, keep those Hobbesian insights in mind as you study those IR theories and grapple with real-world issues.
Right.
You might just find that Hobbes offers some valuable keys to unlocking those enduring puzzles of global politics.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the world of Thomas Hobbes.
Great.
We hope you found it insightful, maybe even a little bit mind-bending. If you enjoyed this exploration and want to ace that UPSC exam, hit that subscribe button and give us a like.
Do it.
We've got plenty more deep dives planned, tackling complex topics and helping you become the global thinkers and leaders of tomorrow. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.